Lewis Hamilton extends his contract with Ferrari until 2029. This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The Formula One universe hasn't just been shaken, it's been set ablaze, launched into another dimension of disbelief, and utterly swallowed by the gravitational force of what might go down as the single most electrifying decision of the modern motorsport era. Lewis Hamilton, the most recognizable, most decorated, and arguably most influential driver of his generation, has officially extended his tenure with Scuderia Ferrari until the end of the 2029 season. And this isn't just a contract extension. No, this is an atomic detonation of intent, a monumental, spine-tingling declaration of war against the status quo. It's a thunderous statement from a living legend who's not just sticking around. He's anchoring himself to the most mythologized team in motorsport history for half a decade more. And the world is not ready for what's coming. Let's talk numbers. The contract is reportedly worth a brain-melting €60 million per year, making it not only one of the highest-paying deals in the history of the sport but a level of investment from Ferrari that has been described internally as beyond financial, it's spiritual. This isn't just salary. This is tribute. This is the kind of number that transforms a driver into a deity. And in Lewis Hamilton's case, the status was already divine before the ink dried. This new deal cements his transformation from world champion to Ferrari icon, from a titan of the turbo-hybrid era to a mythological figure whose name will forever be etched in the red bloodline of Maranello. Insiders close to the negotiations have described scenes of almost cinematic intensity, late-night meetings in hidden villas outside Medina, handwritten notes exchanged between Hamilton and key Ferrari personnel, private jet flights coordinated under radar silence, encrypted calls routed through Monaco and London, and lawyers working under non-disclosure conditions that bordered on Cold War secrecy. The deal wasn't just signed, it was engineered, forged, and baptized in the fires of ambition. According to sources, the emotional weight behind the agreement was so colossal that even seasoned Ferrari executives were visibly trembling when final signatures were placed. This isn't just about racing, one source said. This is about rewriting destiny. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. And what a destiny it promises to be. From the very moment Hamilton first walked through the iconic gates of Maranello, a visible shift occurred. People talk about the presence of greatness, the way it changes a room, alters energy, sharpens focus. But what happened at Ferrari was something far deeper, far more profound. Engineers who had become numb after years of disappointment suddenly found themselves poring over data late into the night. Aerodynamicists who had considered jumping ship suddenly began innovating again, not for money or career advancement, but for a dream. Mechanics started speaking with renewed passion. Cafeteria conversations turned from gossip to strategy. Even the walls of the factory, yes, actual employees have said this, seemed to stand a little taller. Such is the aura Hamilton carries. It's not metaphor. It's measurable. It's real. And it didn't take long for the results to materialize. Even during the early shakedown laps of pre-season testing in Bahrain, Hamilton's synergy with the SF24 was almost unnatural. He wasn't just driving the car, he was bending it to his will. His throttle control was telepathic. His braking points were surgical. His sector times weren't just fast, they were rewriting what the car was capable of. Every debrief was a masterclass. Every radio message felt like an oracle speaking to mortals. Tire degradation? Managed with a precision that left Pirelli engineers double-checking their models. Wind sensitivity? Adjusted on the fly with steering inputs that defied physics. Balance issues? Erased with a flick of strategy mid-stint. It became immediately clear, this was no ordinary transition. This was Hamilton unleashing the full weight of his experience, his talent, and his obsession with excellence, and directing it all through the scarlet chassis of a revived Ferrari machine. In the first few races of the season, Hamilton delivered performances so crisp, so ruthlessly efficient, that even rival teams couldn't help but stare. A string of podiums in Bahrain, Suzuka, and Imola. A near victory in Melbourne, where he led 38 of 58 laps and was only undercut due to a perfectly timed safety car. And then came Jeddah, a race where Hamilton, in the words of Ferrari's own team principal, drove like he was chasing the ghost of Senna. That drive wasn't just fast. It was mythic. A precision kill delivered with the elegance of a concert pianist and the cold resolve of a Navy SEAL. After the race, The paddock fell silent. Nobody clapped. Nobody smiled. Everyone just watched. And now, with this extension locked in, the stakes have gone nuclear. This is no longer just a partnership. It's a 5-year siege. A coordinated, long-range strike on Formula One supremacy. Ferrari hasn't just secured a driver, they've summoned a cultural revolution. They've invested in a leader who doesn't just win races, but bends the arc of history. And Hamilton hasn't just joined a team, he's attached himself to a legacy that has long haunted his dreams, one he's now hellbent on conquering from the inside. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. There are already whispers of what's to come. Unprecedented upgrades planned for 2026, timed perfectly with the next major regulation overhaul. Deep integration of Hamilton into Ferrari's junior driver program, where he's rumored to be mentoring the next wave of talent. Talks of a Netflix documentary being filmed as we speak, covering the transformation of Ferrari under his influence. Exclusive reports suggest Hamilton will be involved in the design of the 2027 car from its first conceptual sketches. Insiders even claim that Lewis requested, and received, a private test track in the hills outside Maranello, tailored specifically to simulate high downforce street circuits for off-season training. And that's not all. Hamilton's commercial pull is already redefining Ferrari's global footprint. The team's merchandise sales have reportedly quadrupled since the announcement of his arrival. Ferrari's social media presence has exploded. Luxury brands are lining up to co-sponsor future liveries. Rumors are swirling about a once-in-a-generation special edition Ferrari road car, designed with Hamilton's input, set to be unveiled at the 2026 Monaco Grand Prix. The Hamilton effect isn't coming. It's here. And it's devouring everything in its path. This isn't a story about a driver signing an extension. This is an earthquake swallowing an entire sport. A master tactician locking himself inside the Colosseum of legends. A declaration of war on mediocrity, on complacency, on doubt. For every rival team, this is a nightmare made real, because Lewis Hamilton, already a legend, has chosen not to fade into retirement or cash in on easy paydays. He has chosen the hardest path, the bloodiest battlefield, the most impossible dream, and he's vowed to turn it into his legacy. The road to 2029 will be paved with fire. It was never going to be just about money. Not with someone like Lewis Hamilton. Not with someone who's spent nearly 2 decades redefining the limits of what a Formula One driver can be, not just on track, but off it. The headlines, the speculation, the cheeky grins during press conferences, they were all distractions. The real story wasn't being played out in front of the cameras. It was unfolding behind tightly closed doors, in ultra-secure rooms nestled within the heart of Maranello, where the walls themselves were steeped in motorsport history, and the air still carried the scent of Enzo Ferrari's legacy. In those glass-walled boardrooms, surrounded by full-scale models of championship-winning Ferraris, faded Polaroids of legends, and cabinets lined with decades of trophies, something monumental was brewing. This wasn't just a contract extension. This was a high-stakes power play, a long chess game between a man who had nothing left to prove and a team desperate to rediscover its soul. The conversation had shifted. It was no longer should Hamilton stay. It was can Ferrari afford to let him go, and more importantly, what would it take to keep him? At the core of it was not a number, not a salary figure. Hamilton could have named any price, and Ferrari, backed by an empire of legacy, fashion, tech, and racing heritage, would have cut the check without blinking. But Lewis didn't want a bigger paycheck. He wanted a bigger role. He wanted to architect a new chapter in Formula One history. He wanted Ferrari not just to hire him, but to listen to him, to believe in him, to build with him. This wasn't about a seat. This was about vision. After the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, where Hamilton pulled off that now iconic double overtake down the main straight like a scene out of a racing movie, the internal dynamics at Ferrari changed overnight. The move wasn't just audacious, it was poetic. Calculated to the millimeter. Executed with surgical precision. A moment so impossibly perfect that even rival team principals muttered under their breath that it shouldn't have been possible. That move didn't just earn him points, it bought him leverage. And he knew exactly how to use it. Within 48 hours, a private message had been sent to John Elkann's office. It wasn't from a lawyer. It wasn't from a Ferrari staffer. It was from Mark Hines, Hamilton's most trusted confidant, requesting a confidential sit-down at Maranello. Not over Zoom. Not by phone. In person. Because what they were about to discuss required eye contact, ironclad discretion, and an environment devoid of leaks, PR handlers, and corporate noise. The meeting that followed would become legend, a gathering of titans cloaked in total secrecy. Elkann, Vigna, Vasseur, Hamilton, and Hines. No assistants. No scribes. Just 5 chairs, a long walnut table, and enough pressure to snap titanium. The conversation began with pleasantries, but it didn't stay polite for long. Hamilton didn't come to play nice. He came with demands. With vision. With an outline for a transformation so radical, it would require Ferrari to rethink the way it had operated for decades. "I don't want to be a passenger in someone else's machine," Hamilton reportedly said, voice steady, eyes laser-sharp. "I want to help build the machine." He wasn't just talking about the car. He was talking about the team, the culture, the philosophy, the approach to data, to driver development, to simulator usage, to pit stop strategy. He wanted access to engineering meetings, input into the hiring of race engineers, influence on how the simulator drivers were trained, even say in the direction of Ferrari's sustainability projects. This was a man asking to be a driver and an architect, a competitor and a collaborator. He spoke about legacy, not just his own, but Ferrari's. He talked about the long winters at Brackley, the sleepless nights before championship deciders, the pain of defeat, and the ecstasy of winning against impossible odds. He brought up Schumacher, not as a comparison, but as a blueprint, as proof that Ferrari, when it gave itself fully to a driver, could create something mythical. And now he asked, "Do you want to create myths again? Or do you want to sell merch?" The silence after that sentence was deafening. Elkann didn't speak for a full minute. When he did, it wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was a question: what do you need from us to begin? And that's when the real negotiation started. Not over digits, but over control. Hamilton wanted Ferrari to build a second simulator specifically for his training regimen. He wanted the team to rethink how they did Friday data collection. He requested direct influence over the driver development pipeline, even suggesting names from karting and F2 programs he'd been quietly scouting. He asked for a sustainability clause in his contract that would allow him to push Ferrari toward electric integration in its future concept programs. He even floated the idea of a Hamilton x Ferrari Foundation for STEM education in underserved communities. This was no ordinary contract. This was a manifesto. A total reinvention of what it means to be a Formula One driver in the 21st century. And it came with a caveat, a dangerous one. If Ferrari said no, he'd walk. Not to Red Bull. Not to McLaren. But away. Fully. Completely. He'd leave F1 and take his influence, his fandom, his legacy, and his billions of dollars in brand value elsewhere. He'd go to Le Mans. Or Formula E. Or build his own motorsport platform. The message was clear: this is your window. Use it. The board knew what that meant. If they lost him, they wouldn't just lose a driver. They'd lose relevance. They'd lose global attention. They'd lose the soul of the Hamilton-Ferrari experiment that had reignited the imagination of millions. Sponsors would ask questions. Journalists would feast. Fans would riot. So they didn't say no. They didn't just say yes either. They asked him to draft it. His terms. His clauses. His vision. And they'd respond line by line. As of now, only a handful of people on Earth know what's in that document. But insiders say it's longer than any F1 driver contract in history. Not because of the fine print, but because of the big print. Because it redefines what it means to be a part of Ferrari. And because, if they honor it, Lewis Hamilton won't just be remembered as the man who joined Ferrari. He'll be remembered as the man who transformed it. And if they don't? Then Jeddah will be remembered as the moment the foundation cracked. The beginning of the end. Not of Hamilton's career, but of Ferrari's second chance. Because you don't get a third when the greatest of all time is sitting across the table asking you to build history. What unfolded behind the closed doors of Maranello wasn't a contract meeting. It wasn't a casual strategic session, a polite conversation between driver and employer, a friendly debrief over espresso. No, it was a reckoning. It was a collision of worlds, of ideologies, of generations. It was the old guard of Ferrari, steeped in tradition and proud in efficiency, standing face to face with a force of nature who had no interest in fitting into anyone's mold, not even Ferrari's. It was Lewis Hamilton at his most unleashed, not behind the wheel, but behind a table, reshaping the foundations of a team that has resisted change for decades. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about titles. This was legacy construction at a cosmic scale. Hamilton walked into that room not as an employee, but as an architect. He had blueprints, a vision, a detailed, relentless master plan for how to drag the Prancing Horse out of the past and into a new golden era. Not quietly, not respectfully, but by ripping up every dusty protocol and hammering something new into existence with the force of his own conviction. He spoke for over 2 hours without pause. He laid out the future of the car, not just the SF-25 but the evolution that would follow it. He dissected the aerodynamic philosophy, pointing out flaws in airflow management that had been present since the 2022 floor regulation shift. He pulled up telemetry comparisons, not just from Ferrari but from Red Bull, Mercedes, and even McLaren, proving his case with cold, brutal data. He argued, with clinical precision, that Ferrari's continued reliance on third-party energy recovery components was not just outdated but suicidal in a title race defined by millisecond deployment strategies. His demand? Full, in-house development of Ferrari's ERS package, with a standalone team built under his oversight. And that was just the beginning. He proposed a reshaping of the wind tunnel schedule, not by asking politely, but by demanding a rotational model that aligned with simulation feedback from actual race weekends. He claimed that the current process, while technically efficient, was creatively stagnant, and he challenged the aerodynamic department to prove him wrong. He even requested remote access to CFD data so he could monitor trends himself between races. Yes, Hamilton, the driver, wanted access to Ferrari's internal modeling algorithms. And no, he wasn't joking. Then came the bombshells. He demanded structural changes to the decision-making process in technical hires. Not just consultation. Veto power. He wanted final say on who touched his car, who advised the aero package, who led chassis development, and who sat in meetings about tire degradation. John Elkann, Ferrari's top man, reportedly pushed back, hard. The room shifted. The atmosphere thickened. Voices rose. According to 2 insiders, the exchange between Hamilton and Elkann reached such intensity that several advisors stepped out to give them space. And that's when the defining moment happened. Hamilton, calm but sharp as a blade, stood up, looked Elkann in the eye, no bravado, no games, and said, "You brought me here for revolution. You don't get to micromanage it. You either trust the process, or you let me go." There was no stutter, no hesitation. It was a line that will be remembered forever in Maranello. It shattered the formality of the room. It silenced even the most senior figures. And it worked. Not because it was theatrical, but because everyone knew, deep down, it was true. They didn't sign Lewis Hamilton to drive a red car. They signed him to redefine what a red car means. And just when the board thought the storm had peaked, Hamilton dropped one more thunderclap. He insisted, not requested, insisted, that a percentage of his compensation be directed toward the construction of a Hamilton Ferrari Youth Driver Academy in the UK. Not Italy. The UK. A legacy institution that would serve as a launchpad for underrepresented young talents in motorsport. Fully Ferrari branded. Fully funded. Fully controlled by a hand-picked board led by Lewis himself. It wasn't a vanity project. It was his condition for signing. And he made it non-negotiable. The board was floored. This wasn't how things were done at Ferrari. They were used to drivers who smiled, nodded, and hoped for better pit stops. This was something else. This was Hamilton reshaping the identity of the team from the inside. Not just with ideas, but with unshakable authority. That's when Fred Vasseur stepped in. The team principal, normally a cool head, a silent manager of egos and expectations, found himself speaking louder than usual. He didn't mediate to soften the blow. He meditated to remind the board of reality. He told them that Hamilton wasn't just a driver, he was a system. A force of culture, of innovation, of uncompromising excellence. A man who had turned Mercedes into an empire by sheer willpower and intelligence, by knowing when to push, when to listen, and when to lead. He told the room that Hamilton doesn't need Ferrari. Ferrari needs Hamilton. And they all knew he was right. Because Ferrari hasn't just been fighting Red Bull and Mercedes on track, they've been fighting themselves. Against indecision. Against internal politics. Against the ghosts of glory past. And here, standing in front of them, was a man not haunted by the past, but obsessed with the future. A man who has seen how dynasties are built and demanded to build another, from scratch, on Italian soil, using tools they didn't even know they had. By the time the meeting ended, Hamilton hadn't just gotten what he asked for. He'd reshaped the architecture of Ferrari's future. He walked out not as an employee, not even as a partner. He walked out as a force of will. The man who dared to look into the heart of Ferrari's tradition and say, "This isn't enough." And then have the audacity, the vision, to show them what could be enough. And this is just the beginning. Because if even half of what he proposed comes to life, if even one of the changes he demanded unlocks a tenth of a second per lap, if that youth academy produces even one driver who rewrites the sport's future, then Lewis Hamilton won't just have driven for Ferrari. He will have transformed Ferrari. Forever. After weeks of ceaseless speculation, clandestine meetings, and a level of tension that could shatter titanium, the political storm that had engulfed the paddock finally began to dissipate, but only on the surface. Beneath the calm, a new battle had already begun. This one wasn't waged on the track, but across legal departments, executive lounges, encrypted emails, and sleepless nights spent dissecting the future of the most iconic racing team in history. Ferrari wasn't just signing a driver. Ferrari was entering into a covenant with destiny, and every single word in that document had the weight of history on its shoulders. Once the paddock chatter slowed to a murmur, the lawyers moved like precision engineers in the background, constructing something more than a contract. They weren't drafting terms. They were crafting the scaffolding of a revolution. The document ballooned into a 143-page behemoth, a legal colossus that wasn't just about compensation or racing rights, but about power, about legacy, about seismic influence. Inside those pages were clauses that had never existed in the history of the sport, not even during the glory days of Schumacher, not even in the wild, unchecked eras of corporate experimentation. These were not mere benefits. These were tectonic shifts disguised as contractual formalities. Hamilton was guaranteed a say in the evolution of Ferrari's next-generation car concepts, including unrestricted participation in development sessions that spanned not just the Maranello wind tunnel, but real-time testing in experimental hybrid rigs housed in secret facilities outside Imola. There was a clause allowing Hamilton exclusive travel flexibility, granting him the ability to fly to and from Ferrari's private simulator facility in Fiorano at a moment's notice, on a customized Dassault Falcon 10X fitted with telemetry analysis screens, active suspension seats for mid-flight recovery, and encrypted satellite communications to stay linked with the factory during takeoff and descent. This wasn't convenience. This was total immersion. He wouldn't just visit Ferrari. He would live Ferrari. But the most staggering inclusion came buried in the legal jargon, a classified section reserved only for a handful of eyes, full access to proprietary data from the 2004 and 2007 World Championship winning campaigns. Telemetry, pit strategies, aerodynamic benchmarks, internal memos between strategists, and comparative development paths. Hamilton would have access to the genetic code of Ferrari's last two great conquests. No other driver, past or present, had ever been granted such unrestricted access. This was not a gift. It was an invitation to merge his DNA with Ferrari's most sacred archives. And then there was the clause that sent shockwaves through the sport's upper echelons. The right for Lewis Hamilton to nominate a future Ferrari Driver Academy Junior. One name. One rising star. Hand-picked. Protected. Groomed under Hamilton's personal oversight, with direct access to Scuderia facilities, mentorship programs, and track time far beyond what had ever been granted to a junior before. Hamilton wasn't just racing in red. He was planting his own bloodline into the veins of the Prancing Horse. He was becoming part of its biological architecture. When it finally came time for the signing, the moment the world had been holding its collective breath for, it wasn't held in some boardroom in Geneva or a glitzy media theater in Monaco. It happened deep within the soul of Ferrari itself. A floor that had been sealed off for 3 days, guarded by men in black suits, engineers with retina scan clearance, and legal teams flown in from Milan and London. The location? A sanctum few had ever stepped foot in, La Sala Rosa. The Red Room. Everything about the room was symbolic. The long table had been custom-built from salvaged carbon fiber panels taken from the wreckage of past monocoques, parts that had once touched 350 kilometers per hour, pieces of machines that had both triumphed and perished on the altar of speed. The lighting was warm but intense, casting shadows that made every movement feel mythic. On the table lay the document, bound in thick, blood-red leather and embossed with the Scuderia insignia, trimmed with gold leaf. The pen? A handcrafted Montblanc, inlaid with rubies mined from Mozambique, chosen specifically to reflect the exact tone of Ferrari's race day livery. It wasn't just a writing instrument. It was a ceremonial dagger, ready to seal a pact between two titans. And then he entered. Lewis Hamilton. Wearing a Ferrari suit so precisely tailored it looked printed onto him. Not the standard issue. This one had been handmade in a private Florentine atelier, dyed in a deeper crimson than usual, threaded with gold so fine it shimmered only under the perfect light. His initials, LCH, were stitched into the cuff with thread made of titanium-infused silk. His boots had embossed number 44s on the heel, flanked by tiny olive branches, a nod to victory in both war and peace. The room didn't breathe. It waited. Vasseur stood tall, flanked by Ferrari board members, each one attempting, and failing, to mask their awe. These were men who had lived through every era of Ferrari, but in that moment, they knew they weren't just welcoming a driver. They were making history. As Hamilton approached the table, the room seemed to contract around him. Time itself slowed. He looked at the document, read the first line. Let it be known that this agreement shall redefine the future of the Scuderia. And then slowly, with a calmness that betrayed the sheer historical weight of what he was about to do, he began signing. One page. Then another. Then another. Every signature a scalpel cutting through decades of drought. Every stroke an act of both defiance and belief. Defiance of every doubt, every insult, every closed door he had ever faced. Belief in what he was about to build with this team, with this legacy, with this machine painted in red in history. The final page trembled under his hand. Not from him, but from the energy in the room, the way electricity had filled the air like a silent storm ready to explode. When he signed it, a soundless detonation erupted in the hearts of everyone watching. No applause. No words. Just the roar of destiny being fulfilled. Because in that moment, Lewis Hamilton didn't just become a Ferrari driver. He became Ferrari. The ink had barely dried when the vibrations began, not mechanical, not from engines or gears or compressors, but from the very soul of Maranello itself. Something ancient had been awakened. The walls of the Scuderia's legendary headquarters didn't just witness the signing, they absorbed it. The lineage of legends, the ghosts of Ascari, Lauda, Schumacher, all stirred in that instant, as if summoned by a new name etched into the blood-red chronicles of Ferrari history. Lewis Hamilton. Not a mere acquisition. Not a strategic hire. A seismic shift in identity. A reshaping of destiny. A rewriting of the cosmos surrounding Formula One. The bell in the engine room rang not as protocol but as prophecy. A tradition that had not echoed since the most sacred moments in Ferrari's past came alive once more. And outside, in the courtyard where thousands of stories have unfolded, where generations of passion have been passed down from fathers to sons, mothers to daughters, the reaction was electric. Not choreographed, not rehearsed, but pure. Red flares lit the air. Confetti shot skyward like a volcano of belief. Test mules roared their engines into the Tuscan sky as if shouting a warning to every other team on the grid. The dragon has awoken, and now, it flies with fire no one has ever seen before. In that moment, Lewis Hamilton didn't just sign a contract. He stepped into myth. He merged with the last great symbol in motorsport that still lives and breathes like a living god. Ferrari, for all its history, its pain, its beauty, its flaws, is no ordinary team. It is Italy's heartbeat. A nation's hope. A temple of speed built on sacrifice and obsession. And now the most transcendent driver of his generation, maybe of all time, has sworn his next chapter to it. Around the globe, the reaction didn't wait for the press releases to circulate. It moved faster than fiber optic. Paparazzi helicopters circled Fiorano. Fans wept in Tokyo. Sao Paulo went into uproar. London newsstands sold out in minutes. Every major sports outlet broke programming to air the footage of the handshake, the red suit reveal, the first images of Lewis Hamilton beneath the Prancing Horse. Instagram crashed under the weight of millions of reposts. Twitter bent under hashtags. TikTok reels chronicled every facial expression. And deep within the sport, behind the corporate scripts and rehearsed interviews, everyone felt it. This was not just a career move. This was a declaration of war on history itself. And then came the speculation. What would the car be like? Would Ferrari design it around him? Would Leclerc rise to the occasion or be eclipsed by the tidal force Hamilton brings into a team? Would the culture shift? Would Mercedes implode or be reborn? The questions came like a monsoon. But none of them truly mattered in the face of what was certain. Hamilton was now woven into the fabric of something sacred. He had not just joined Ferrari. He had become a pillar of it. An altar. A force the team would now orbit around with gravitational pull so fierce it could bend the very structure of Formula One. For the engineers in Maranello, it was no longer about calculations and simulations. It was about immortality. Designing not just a race-winning machine, but a chariot for a legend. CFD models took on urgency. Wind tunnel sessions became crusades. Every screw, every bolt, every component of carbon fiber now carried a purpose beyond victory. It carried the burden of history and the promise of resurrection. And Hamilton? He was already different. The moment he zipped up that red suit, something shifted. His posture changed. His eyes burned not with vengeance, but with vision. The hunger was no longer for records. It was for transcendence. He had already conquered tracks, seasons, dynasties. Now, he sought to conquer fate itself. To prove that greatness has no expiry date. That reinvention, when done with total conviction, doesn't just extend a legacy, it multiplies it. And make no mistake, Ferrari has bent itself to him. The organizational flowcharts have shifted. The politics, the egos, the internal silos that have plagued the team for decades, already they are being dismantled, reforged in his image. Team meetings now start with his presence. Development cycles align to his feedback. Even the decor in the simulator bays has changed. Because when Lewis Hamilton walks into a building, he doesn't just take up space, he defines it. He alters the very air. And now, every corridor of Ferrari smells of ambition, of adrenaline, of inevitability. This is not a 5-year deal. It is a 5-year campaign. A war against mediocrity. A siege upon the impossible. 5 seasons to build a monument that will stand not just in the record books, but in the hearts of generations unborn. Imagine it, Lewis Hamilton crossing the line in Monaco, the Ferrari flag waving behind him, Monte Carlo erupting in red. Imagine Monza, shaking under the chorus of tifosi who have waited decades for a true prophet. Imagine Suzuka, Interlagos, Silverstone, all baptized anew by this alliance of myth and man. And while the rivals strategize, whisper, and wonder if this will work, Hamilton and Ferrari are not wondering. They are building. They are not aiming for glory. They are engineering a dynasty that will haunt the future. They are staring directly into the eye of the storm and daring it to blink first. Because what's coming is not just a resurgence. It's a phenomenon. A convergence of 2 of the most powerful forces motorsport has ever seen. Hamilton is no longer just a man in a machine. He is now the vessel of a movement. He is now the pulse inside the red beast that once ruled the earth. And that beast? It has been hungry for far too long. Now, it has teeth again. Now, it has blood in its mouth. Now, it has Hamilton.